right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our virtual event space. So my name is Allie. You might recognize me from our Lake Forest Park location. I'm your host for this evening. I'm so excited to be introducing Pete Finestone, Curt Weiss, and S.W. Lauden here to discuss Forbidden Beat perspectives on punk drumming. But before we get into the good stuff, on behalf of all of us here at Third Place Books, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in. For those of you who may not know, we are an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area. We're having more and more events in person, which is very exciting, but our online program is sticking around to connect readers and authors in a virtual space. So thank you all so much for tuning in and for buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. So if you haven't gotten your hands on any of the books that come up this evening and you would like to, I will be linking books in chat. For those of you in the Seattle area, come on in, grab a copy off the shelf. Or if you're not local or not leaving the house, we of course ship. So go ahead and follow those links in chat over to our website. While you're on our website, I definitely encourage you to check in on some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up in the spring. So if you'd like to stay in touch with our community, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's just a weekly event about, or a weekly update about events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. So tonight we are here for an hour, and towards the end we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. It is different than the chat box, which is great for virtual applause and connecting with each other. I absolutely invite you to share where you're tuning in from in the chat. When it comes time for questions, though, do make sure those end up in the Q&A so we can most easily find them. While you're in our chat and question spaces, I want to remind you to please lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. And finally, should any technical issues arise, we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. So at this point, let's all settle in and get comfy, because without further ado, I am so pleased to welcome S.W. Lauden, the co-editor of Go All the Way, a literary appreciation of power pop, and the sequel, Go Further. His Greg Salem punk rock PI series includes Bad Citizen, Corporation, Grizzly Season, and Hang Time. In conversation this evening, I'm so thrilled to welcome Pete Finestone, who played drums for seminal LA punk band Bad Religion from 1982 to 1992, drumming on fan favorites Suffer, No Control, and Against the Grain. His playing helped define punk drumming for the next decade and inspired drummers from Pennywise to Blink-182. And finally, I'm so happy to introduce Curt Weiss, the author of Stranded in the Jungle, Jerry Nolan's Wild Ride. He drummed for Beat Rodeo, Elliott Murphy, and the Rockats, and has spent close to 30 years working in TV production, helping manage several PBS documentaries, including the ACLU, A History, and Vaudeville for American Masters. So the book tonight is Forbidden Beat, in which some of today's most respected writers and musicians explore the history of punk percussion with personal essays, interviews, and lists featuring their favorite players and biggest influences. So thank you all so much for being here. Audience members, do not be shy in chat. If you need anything, let me know. And with that, I'm going to pass the stage to our speakers. So welcome, guys.
Welcome.
Hi there.
Thank you so much, Ali. Really appreciate the amazing slick intro.
So happy to be here in my new hometown, Seattle.
Oh, I'll have to say hi to you somewhere. I'm out in Kirkland.
I'm out in West Seattle. Kurt from Kirkland.
Yeah.
Kirkland?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can bore everybody with the details. You're missing a bridge at the moment, so I know things are kind of tough for you out there.
Oh, yeah, it's problematic, right?
All right.
Pour that cement.
Well, fellas, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. And I can't thank you enough for your contributions to the book. I mean, coming up with the idea for a project like this, and then actually finding the people who are willing to take the time and tell their stories and write and get edited and have me badger them for weeks on end to send their stuff in is not easy, but you guys did it, and you're part of a group of people that made this book possible. So I thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome.
Hey, everybody who's joining us today. I am S.W. Lauden. You can just call me Steve. We're going to talk about punk rock. We're going to talk about drumming, and we're going to talk about punk rock drumming. Those are our topics for tonight's conversation. There'll also be some literary talk, but mostly the literary talk will be about punk rock drumming. So I'm going to start off with a couple of just sort of general questions so that the people who are tuning in can learn about Curt and Pete. Pete, let's start with you. What came first for you, punk rock or drumming?
I would say drumming, but that's a big stretch of the imagination. Because when I first picked up sticks, it was more or less to please my mom and dad, who thought my life was pretty much going nowhere. So I played in my school jazz band. I went to a private school, and I had never played a snare in my life. But I kind of lied and said, you know, snare drum, no problem. And they gave me charts, and they said, come in on one. And I was just like, woo! And they were like, okay, next. So as I stated in your fantastic book, I proceeded to more or less waste my dad and mom's money for about a year, going to take privates from these really fancy jazz cats from the school. And I never practiced. I was just not inspired, you know. It just didn't really speak to me. I loved music, but the idea of practicing was kind of anathema to me, you know. So as I stated in the book, I was the ripe old age of maybe 15. My friend said, you want to go see Jethro Tull at the Forum, or you want to go see this band called The Clash at the Santa Monica Civic? And I had not heard The Clash. I had heard Tull. I kind of liked Tull, you know. And I decided to take a risk. Not really a risk, but I just decided to try something new, Steve. I went and saw The Clash, and it changed my life. It's that simple, bro. I went in, and the music, I had never heard anything like that. Seeing Joe Strummer up there on stage, possessed, speaking about, you know, racism, war, whatever, and seeing Topper behind on those drums, just, you know, it just blew my little mind. You know, I was, what is this? Whatever it is, I want to be part of it, because I was not part of it. You know, I was not really a jock. You know, in school, I was a very inferior student, so I really had no real place in my life. You know, Steve. I felt really outside whatever was in mainstream then. You know, and this band, The Clash, was a portal to me discovering a whole new music and a whole new set of friends. So that's how it started, bro.
Wow. I mean, look, what a great crossroads story. And really seeing The Clash that early on is like, you get so many cool
first album.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Wow. Incredible.
Yeah.
Curt, why don't you tell us how you got started? You know, what came first for you, punk rock or drumming?
Well, it was definitely drumming. Like so many people my age, I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show when I was about 4, and I just flipped out, you know, as much as a 4-year-old could flip out. And this led to, you know, listening to the radio. I mean, AM radio in the 60s was a dream. You know, you had the Beatles and the other British invasion groups. And you had Motown and Stax Volt and the Byrds, and then there was garage rock, and then soon you had psychedelia, and you know, and then that was just great until like the rise of FM radio. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to make music. And I think I was about 5 years old. I got guitar lessons, but just like there was this kind of strumming along and skip to my Lou kind of stuff. And, you know, I just it wasn't working for me. And I think it may have been around the time Help came out, which was the Beatles' second film in '65. And then they let me take drum lessons. And there was some sort of rule that if you stuck with it for 6 months, you could get a drum set. And so I stuck with it, and I got some little beat up Japanese drum set, which the cymbal broke in like 2 days or something, but I still played it, and I didn't care. And it was just like bashing away to Beatles records and Monkees records. And you know, even like the TV shows, like Where the Action Is with Paul Revere and the Raiders, and Hullabaloo and Shindig. I mean, it was this great stuff you heard on the radio, and you'd see them, and it was really exciting. But you know, they were still in their 20s, even if they were in their teens. They were so much older than I was, you know. And I loved Dylan, but I never really got into the singer-songwriter thing, and or the Dead or the band or anything. I got swept up like by Cream and the Who and Jethro Tull. I'm so glad, Pete, you mentioned Jethro Tull, because they really are like the forgotten band of the time, who don't get enough appreciation.
Gary Moore Barlow, yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, right.
And then, you know, in the 70s, you got prog rock, and, you know, your mind is, if you're a musician, you're just listening to new stuff and learning and thinking and trying to figure out what is what. And, you know, I loved hard rock like Alice Cooper and Blue Oyster Cult and Black Sabbath. But I used to read this magazine called Circus Magazine. And, you know, they would have Mott the Hoople and Slade and Bowie and just like, you know, so I started to learn about them. And I think that was probably the first time I saw the New York Dolls, but it was really scary what the New York Dolls were doing. They were dressed sort of like women, and, you know, it was when you were 13 years old in the 70s, it's like you probably did not want to be seen holding a New York Dolls album. So you just like stayed back. And there was jazz, funk, and fusion. And you know, like I started to play the school jazz band, and, you know, so I was all consumed with music, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do after high school. And I made a half-hearted stab at like the Manhattan School of Music and Juilliard, but I knew I'd never get in. And I ended up at the Berklee School of Music. And this was in 77. And I still hated it. I really did not like it, because I was never really a jazzer. I could fake it, but I had no passion for it. And meanwhile, my friends in New York are telling me about Patti Smith and Blondie, because I was born in New York and I ended up going to Boston for Berklee. And so I started to hear those records. I'd come home on holidays and stuff. And finally, the day I turned 18, which back then was the legal drinking age, it wasn't 21, it was 18. I just said, I'm going to go out to a club and see a band and buy a beer, like legally. And just that night, at this small club called the Paradise, was Elvis Costello and the Attractions playing their first American tour.
Ah, baby.
And, you know, if I'd been born a day earlier, you know, who knows who I would have walked in and seen, you know, Commander Cody and the Lost Planet Airmen or something, whatever it was. It's like, I just happened to be there and see Elvis Costello with the Attractions. And that was it. That was it. I quit Berklee within a week. I just said, this is it. This is exciting. These are people who are like my age. And from then on, it was like punk and new wave. It's like my Chick Corea records and Genesis records. It's just like, forget it. I want Blondie and the Ramones. And I went backwards to like Bowie and Roxy music. So yeah, it was definitely the drums before punk rock. So it was the long-winded way of saying it.
No, I love that. I love hearing that both of you talk about listening to other kinds of music before you listen to punk rock, right? Because like for a long time, I would joke about people. Everybody seemed like they were born punk rock, like no one wanted to own the roots that went beyond punk rock. But you talk to people who were there in the first, second, even the third wave, and they were raised on other stuff, and then
of course,
rock, and it kind of opened things up for them. It sounds like that was the case for both of you guys.
Yeah, it's really weird. I remember the year before I saw The Clash, I had a friend, he actually went to London for a summer vacation. And he came home and he brought back all these like singles from like, I think it was Sham maybe, or just really obscure stuff. And he had like a nose ring now and an ear piercing. He had totally changed his look to what was in. It was the first wave of punk. And I remember going over to his house and was like, what happened to you, for fuck's sake? Excuse my language. I was like, what happened to you, Mike? Jesus, like, what? Like, I thought he was 15 going through a crisis, And I was, and I think he played me a few singles. I was like, this is dog shit, this is terrible. And I'm not sure why. 1 year later, as I explained, I went and saw the Clash, and maybe I was just not ready at that age. I remember that year being problematic for me too, with my parents, and just some stuff went down. That was kind of some trauma, I think too, when I look back at it now, Steve. And I think I was looking for a voice, that could speak to the shit I was going through. I had no idea it took a band 5,000 miles away, to really speak to me on that emotional, emotional space, yeah, and that's how it started, and then, like I told you, or I explained in the book, I started to go to shows, just not punk shows. I went to a lot of new wave shows. And then one auspicious day, I met the guys in Bad Religion. They were actually recording their first single. And I knew a friend who said, you know what, let's go out and I want you to meet my friends. They're from the Valley too. So I went, and right away I met Greg first, and I could tell, man, for a kid that age, he had a lot of charisma, and he was incredibly bright. And then I actually met the band. They were all really bright, and just like, I'm like, I see something in them that I see in myself, And then I had a car, like I told you, and most of those guys did not have a car. So I became their chauffeur. We would go every Tuesday and Wednesday to the Starwood. Those from Los Angeles know what that is. It was I remember like walking there for the first time. I think it was a Tuesday night to see Fear, China White, and maybe it was the Jerks. And I remember walking into the lot. There was a lot right outside the club where everybody hung and they scored whatever they wanted to score and just talked. And I remember like, this is home. I know it sounds kind of cheesy now, but I remember walking up there and saying, I'm home, like here's thousands of freaks just like me, not thousands, but there were a lot, and you could not even go to a show. You could just hang in the lot and speak to kids your own age who were from wherever in LA, from like the beach areas, from wherever, right? And you could, and that's how I made friends. I had no friends at school, they were just all jocks and, punk rock, B-52 suck, that was where I was coming from, right? So that's where, for me, that really punk rock school started. I don't want to say school. That's where it really started, every Tuesday and Wednesday night, you could see, like I said, Fear, Flag, the Jerks, whomever. And it was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, I had that same experience in LA, but at Fender's Ballroom.
Oh, Jesus, that place was scary, dude.
Yeah, it was, but it was still you and your friends hanging out on the stage up front, and like, kind of feeling like you had to thread the needle to get in the door, and then you didn't know what kind of trouble you were going to get into inside, but you felt part of something immediately, like it was visceral, right? And I think it was that, like, the way that punk rock broke down the barrier between the dudes on stage and the people who were out in the crowd.
I mean, it's been discussed ad nauseum that there is no barrier between stage and the crowd, but it's true. That was a block. That was, for me, at least, one of the fundamental building blocks of that scene, where your friends were on stage, after they played, they would come down and have a beer with you, right? Yeah. As opposed to what I had seen, like maybe Quiet Riot, Randy, way back in the day. And I saw them, I was like maybe 14. They were like rock stars, and the crowd was like, hail Quiet Riot, Yeah. There was a clear separation,
Yeah, it was a wall of bouncers and a riot barricade at the bottom of the stage.
Yeah,
so we're talking about like our experience growing up in LA, going to punk shows. What was your experience going to punk and new wave shows in New York?
Well, actually, first I went to them in Boston.
Oh, right, yeah.
going to college. And, before that, I had seen, bands at Madison Square Garden or the Palladium. Previous to that, it was the Academy of Music, and, like Jethro Tull and Led Zeppelin. And, it was a great experience. But unless you were one of those lucky people up in those first few rows, you were just watching them from way back. They were just so removed from your life. I mean, Alice Cooper was still great because, he was chopping off his head and guillotines and all that. That does work from the back. But otherwise, it just, you could dig the music, but you really felt separated. And it wasn't till I started to go to clubs, yes, seeing Elvis Costello in the small club, but I remember seeing the Cramps it was May of '78. And it was, Boston had a great local scene.
Yeah.
This club called the Rathskeller, which people called the Rat. I mean, even before that with the Modern Lovers and the Real Kids, they had like DMZ, who became the Liars, and the Cars was really the big breakout band. But, you could still go to like Boston Garden and see David Bowie, or, in the Kinks at a theater. And then you'd go to the Rat. And I remember it was a local band called the Atlantics, who were really good. They did have one major label record, went nowhere. And then on the same bill were the Cramps, because luckily the Rat had a deal with like CBGB's, and they were trading bands all the time. We got these great bands in New York. We're going to, please book them, and I'll book the bands you tell me are cool in New York. So I got to see the Dictators, and I got to see the Cramps.
Wow.
And the Cramps was, the original four with Brian and the drummer Nick Knox.
Yeah, Nick Knox is
so incredible.
drummer.
It was so incredible.
Yeah.
And it was just, he never, like, there was like no emotion on his face, which was just so, it was just perfect. And Lux, was just insane, falling all over, and he would drop his mic, and we were like the only people really digging it up front, and I'd pick it up and give it back to him. I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And then, and he'd start screaming. It was just like a complete different person. But you felt comfortable just letting go and being part of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd start to meet people going to these shows who were into the music as well. And that is part of it, this brotherhood or being part of a gang or whatever it is. I mean, that really is what it is. You change your clothing in a sense. You try to find out who you are, and you identify with people who have this kind of clothing and this look and this attitude. And it really is belonging as much as anything else.
Yeah. I mean, look, the Cramps, I saw them much later, but what a fantastic show. And Nick, what an amazing drummer, like really timeless drumming style all his own.
If he wasn't playing, I just want to say, if he wasn't playing the hi-hat, he would just put his foot like on the top, not even on the pedal, above it, like on the where the pieces meet. Just like, I'm not playing this, so I'll just, relax this part of my body. That's cool. But he would still just kick it out. He knew exactly what to play, and he never overplayed. There's no such thing as overplaying to him.
Yeah, it's weird. I saw them, good amount of times. There was one tour or one show where he actually wasn't in the band. I think it was Nikki Beat from the Weirdos. Sat in. He was a, very stylish guy. He could play really well. It just wasn't the Cramps. It was not the Cramps. Despite them playing the same songs, the same, the same vibe, just without him behind the throne or on the throne, it was just not the same band. It was weird.
To me, that was one of the magical things, and maybe it was one of the things that made me want to write a book about a drummer. It's because so often I always felt the drummers were taken for granted. It's like the fat guy at the back, or the guy who doesn't look as good, or he's not as talented, or whatever it was. And I remember seeing a documentary on the Ramones. I forget, the name was called I don't even remember what it was, End of the Century, I think it was. And they were talking to Johnny and Dee Dee about when Tommy left. And if you know anything about Tommy, was really the only one that had any musical experience. He was really the conceptualizer of the whole thing. And he was the one that says, like, this is the type of drummer you need. Joey, you should sing, let's get another drummer. And they auditioned drummers. And Tommy kept having to demonstrate to the auditioning drummers what to do, even though he wasn't really a drummer.
Right.
And to me and so like he was integral. He invented that style. And like, you know, Dee Dee and Johnny are both going, when he left, we just figured we'd get another drummer. No big deal. You know, and I was like, oh my, are you insane? You know, and to me, that made me feel like you really need to like write a book to try to explain why a drummer is such an integral part of the personality of a band. Good or bad.
Good segue.
Why did you start with Jerry Nolan then?
I mean, why did I start with him for a book?
Yeah. Why? What was it about Jerry Nolan in particular, from the New York Dolls and the Heartbreakers?
Yeah.
That's who you landed on as the subject for your book.
Well, at the time, you know, when I'd been out of music for a while and I'd been doing television, and I guess I wanted something to call my own. And I figured, well, you know, why not write a book about Jerry or somebody or something? And I figured from my experience in television, I could maybe just do like a cut and paste kind of book, oral history. Mm-hmm. And I was, you know, thinking about who or what to do it on. And the Dolls had reformed at the time, and then Arthur died. And I knew that there was a book on Arthur in the, you know, coming out sooner or later. And there had been books on Johnny and books about the Dolls. And I said, well, yeah. Why not? Why not just, you know, because I knew people around Jerry, and I met Jerry a couple of times, and I used to see him play. And, you know, he was in the Dolls, who were as much of a catalyst of what happened at CBGB's as anybody. Maybe them and the Velvets are about on the same, and the Stooges. You know, it's hard to argue who's who. But definitely, because they were based in New York, all those Dolls fans became the original CBGB's groups: Television, Blondie, Ramones, you name it. They were all Talking Heads even. And he was on like the Anarchy tour, and he was in, you know, in the Heartbreakers when they did like the first CBGB's festivals, and he played with Sid Vicious, you know, and it was just like he was there at ground zero for like so much of what became punk rock. And like then in like the early 90s, there was this big article that came out about him. It was after Johnny died. And it was on the cover of the Village Voice in New York. And it was this great, like 10 pages about like my life as a doll. And then he died soon after that. And it was just like, there was all this excitement from the article, and then all of a sudden he's gone. And I just said, there's something there. It's an interest to me. I thought a book is supposed to be stories you didn't know already, you know, new stuff. And even what was in that 10-page article, I had known so much more from being in the Rockats and learning about what it was like to have Jerry in your band, and friends of his and girlfriends of his. I said, there's so much there. And that's what it grew out of.
Well, it's an amazing book. Once I read it, I knew I had to have you in Forbidden Beat. And I'm so thankful that you wrote yet another essay about Jerry Nolan and the role that he plays in forming a lot of the foundational work for punk rock as it follows in the decades.
Because I was just going to say, excuse me, Steve, just to Curt, I just read your piece today, because one thing, Steve, I think this book is remarkable. You know, I had no expectations. You know, I thought it was just going to be this little thing about punk rock drumming, but it's so much more, my friend. It's so much more. And like, I haven't read the whole thing because I like to go piecemeal, you know, read a story, think about it, read another story, think about it. But like Curt, and there's stories too, like I read this story today on Derek Plorty, right?
Derek from Lagwagon?
Yeah. Like him, that story and Curt's story were really amazing, because they're just not about the drums. There's so much more there. It's about these characters and how they found their way in the place they had no idea they would be at that place, you know, and their greatness, as Curt writes about, were known to a select group, you know, and they died kind of known, but not really known by, you know, by a bigger group of fans, you know. And your book is really, really diverse, you know. It's just not about punk rock drumming. You know, there's so much more there, Steve. As Curt said, there's stories, and there's stories about drummers and styles that I had no clue about, you know. And like I go back to Curt, your story was amazing.
Thank you.
You know, you talk about the New York scene and that whole milieu that I was like, oh my God, I'm like, I love these bands, but I had no clue about their backstories that you write about, you know? So I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but this book is so much more than just about punk rock drumming, you know? There's just so much more there. So if you have not purchased this yet, please please get it. You know, it's an amazing book, Steve.
Oh, thank you. But it's amazing because of people like you and Curt. Like, that's what I was saying. I came up with the concept, and I didn't know what kind of response I was going to get when I reached out to people I knew, people I didn't know, people whose music I love, people whose music I was only just discovering. And the response I got back was overwhelmingly positive. The people, both drummers and non-drummers and writers, wanted to tell the stories of these drummers because, like Curt mentioned, they felt like they were often overlooked. But the journey to becoming a punk rock drummer is often pretty fascinating.
Yeah, you're right. The stories about these kids who remind me of myself, who are they almost came upon drums by mistake, you know? And it turned around their lives, you know?
Yeah, like Lynn Perco-Troll from the Rex and the Dicks. That when she starts playing,
I just read that one today too. Right?
She didn't have any drums. She flipped over trash cans. Band.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Sherry Page from Thick, which is like 30 years later. She's trying to convince her parents to buy her a drum set. They'll only buy her a snare drum. So she used her babysitting money to buy her first punk rock kit. I mean, like, where there's a will, there's a way. But all of these stories are like unbelievable. When people hear the music and it does what it's supposed to do, which is it tells you, you can do this too, and you don't have to wait.
Yeah,
and you're a drummer,
exactly.
You can flip over some trash cans, you can get a cheap drum set, you can bang on a table, but you can be in a band tomorrow. And that openness and inclusivity of punk rock is game-changing.
Yeah,
yeah, it was incredible. And, you know, seeing like bands like drummers would have these little sets of sort of thrown together stuff, all different colors sometimes because it was, you know, thrown together. They didn't have to have 2 bass drums and gongs and, you know, all this stuff.
Not the gong.
Well, I mean, the gong, I could go with a gong, but you know, just like a small kit. And then it's like, well, that's what Ringo did. And that's what Charlie Watts did. And like, they're like the greatest bands ever. And you don't need a giant kit. Buddy Rich, completely different kind of drummer. He just had a little kit. You know, the great jazz drummers, they're really all just little small kits. And it forces you to focus. To me, that was part of the magic of it. And if you just, and like you were saying, all you had to do was want to be a musician.
Yes.
You didn't have to wait till you knew how to play. You'd figure something out. And that was, you know, part of the greatness. Like, you'd hear these bands like the Cramps. Nobody would sound like the Cramps. They didn't have a bass player. Like, you wouldn't dare, you know, have a band appear on stage without a bass, but they just did it and they invented something new. And that was, to me, what was so incredible. I mean, the Ramones, Johnny couldn't play solo, so nobody bothered, you know? Like, who needs a solo? This riff is really cool, and let's just keep playing it, you know? And everybody loved it.
I mean, drum solos, when you go see a concert, what do most of the people do during a drum solo? They go take a shit, or they go grab a beer, except for John Bonham, maybe, you know? But outside that, and, you know, you speak about a four-piece set. I mean, I appreciate guys who have more drums and they express themselves on some more toms. They do their phrasing changes with more toms. But to me, it's like 2 toms is like already like too much work, you know? I'm like, anymore, like I can't think about it, for fuck's sake, you know? Like,
stuff to drag around too.
Exactly. Oh my God. And at my age, if I still play shows, I try to have my son come and become my roadie. That's about it, you know?
Yeah, schlepping the gear is a lot harder than it used to be in some regards. Makes you tired just thinking about it.
Morty.
Pete, I want to talk because we talked a little bit about Curt's essay in the book about Jerry Nolan, and that's
it's phenomenal.
He goes into the background of like where punk rock comes from in the garage world and the proto-punk world.
Yeah.
You come up like a generation later, and your contribution to the book is you're writing about your 5 biggest punk rock drumming influences.
Yeah.
And I wanted to start off with Lucky Lehrer because he wrote the foreword for the book. He is also the seminal drummer in the Circle Jerks. So
he's a character. He's a character.
I'd love to know what it is about him that.
Let me tell you a story. He was the one who first let me become their basic drum roadie.
Oh.
I would hang around enough, and I befriended him, and I said, "Hey, can I be your roadie if I take a drum lesson from you?" You know, so it was quid pro quo, right? I was his drum roadie, and I got to learn to be on stage at a show, and that was exciting. You know, and just to see that craziness up close, because back then, 1982 or so, the Jerks were, for us in the band, Bad Religion, the Jerks were the band. And I'm so glad to see now they're on tour again. But they were the band, the Jerks. We loved the Circle Jerks, you know? So I became friends with him, and I would sit behind his set, being his drum roadie, just trying to figure out, like, what was he doing? Like, how could he throw in all those fills and triplets and still make it punk rock, you know? So, you know, hanging out with him and taking a few lessons from him, I really learned just a basic, you know, you know, and from that I expanded. But he was so much more than just a punk rock drummer, you know. As he discusses in the book, he was brought up with Latin and swing and jazz, you know. You could see it in his playing too. So for me, he was my first real friend and my real first North Star, you know.
You just, when you went you basically described, you encapsulate what the forbidden beat is, which is kind of beautiful.
Bad Religion, the forbidden beat, yeah.
And for those who don't know, Pete actually played drums on the song Forbidden Beat, which is partially why the book is called what it's called.
I'm flattered.
Playing with Bad Religion. I think it's also beautiful that you, on your list, you include Bobby Scher.
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you that story.
He replaces you in Bad Religion. And I
made a premature decision that changed my life, and I decided it was time to leave the band. And I don't want to get into that now. But what I do want to get into is I got a call from him. And I hadn't met him a few times, you know. I knew who he was, and I heard he had taken over the throne. And he called me up one day and said, "Hey, you know, you think there's any way you could come over? I'm having a hard time on a few of your songs that you played on." I was like, "Are you kidding me? They're so simple." But then I actually went to his house, and we just sat. He showed me these great little Latin beats that he had learned that I wanted to learn. And he was just like, oh my God, so friggin' humble. Like, it was scary. He was so comfortable in his own skin, which I never was comfortable in my own skin. I still am. I'm still trying to work on that, you know? But I showed him a few songs, and he played them back, and I'm like, they found someone remarkable who was going to take them to their next level. And part of me was, you know, I'm only human, right? So part of me was somewhat jealous, but part of me was like, okay, you know, they're going to be fine. You know, I was just one guy who was able to play on the drums for 12 years, and it's time for someone else to have that throne, you know. But we're still friends, and you know, he's just a remarkable dude. He's a remarkable dude. And to go back to what Curt spoke about being able to play on a 4-piece kit, for me, he was the Charlie Watts of punk rock. Just so solid in his pocket. You could always, even though the music was fast, you could always, at least I could see where he would move around the one sometimes, and just so creative, but yet so steady. You know, to me, I love Bobby. To me, he's also one of my favorite drummers of all time. he could play everything. He could play everything too. And he's so economical too, how he plays, just with a great pocket,
Yeah, and
pocket.
a phenomenal drummer. The one other person on the list I want to
Yeah.
talk about is Chuck Biscuits, because
Oh,
I think
well, come
when
on.
I surveyed,
Where do you start?
people, informally or formally, when I talked to people, his name came up probably the most. People point to Chuck Biscuits, specifically those first two DOA records.
He was a prodigy. Yeah, as we all know, he was a prodigy. I remember him. I was able to go to their shows, and I was able to, get in the backstage area or whatever. And I was like, why are all these people behind the drummer just watching him? I'm like, who sits behind the drummer except drum geeks, And it was a pretty good sized crowd, guys. I just remember walking over, like, what is he doing? Like, that's not fair. Like, what's he doing? And I was able to figure out he had his style with his flams and his triplet kick patterns. He was just, but at a really fast speed. He was phenomenal, dude. He just blew my brains out. He to me was always in that band with him, Randy, and Joey. Today, to me, is one of my favorite bands of all time.
Yeah, well, I mean, did you?
That three-piece.
If you've read Joey's interview that I did in the book.
Yeah, that was great.
I mean, the way he talks about Chuck being like he was just a little snot-nosed kid.
He was a little snot-nosed kid, right? Yeah. And again, I had no idea. So again, for me, it was great to hear that story, That's why, again, it's such a great book, Steve.
Oh, thanks, man. I really
Yeah.
Hey, Curt, we're going to go to questions here pretty soon. And before I do that, I want to thank Allie again for setting this up and doing such a magnificent intro and being such a great host. And I want to thank Third Place Books for having us. Really appreciate it. This has been a fun conversation. Of course, it's flying by, as I knew it would. Curt, before we go to questions, who would you point to as some, aside from Jerry Nolan, who would you point to as a few of your key influences in punk rock?
Well, I mean, they weren't punk rock players, but I'd say Ringo, obviously. You think of the great records. One guy that doesn't get enough appreciation is Paul Thompson from Roxy Music.
Mm-hmm.
There was aspects of him that were took up a lot of space, like John Bonham, but he kept things much simpler. If there was going to be another book like Volume 2, Pete Thomas from Elvis
Oh my
Costello
God. Bingo, Curt. Bingo, wow. Dude. Phenomenal.
Yeah, explosive.
Oh my God.
Whatever it is that needs to be done, he could do it.
Oh my God, you're so right.
We could have a whole other conversation about this, but in the interview I did with Stephen McDonald from Red Cross, and he's playing with the Melvins now, and he was in Off. I was talking to him, and he was like, when I was 10, he was 10, his older brother, Jeff McDonald, they bought Led Zeppelin tickets to see Led Zeppelin at the Forum. Mm-hmm. That was 2 months before the show.
Oh.
By the time they got to the show, they discovered the Ramones. So they had kind of their back.
So they forgot the tickets.
but they still went to the show, and it was one of the shows where Keith Moon came out and did Moby Dick with John Bonham, and it was still like Stephen McDonald jokes in the interview. He's like, if you read my references, if you read interviews with me, I sound like I'm a 65-year-old man, but in reality, I was just a little kid at all these shows. But he talks, Curt, a lot about. I made the assumption in my conversation with him and with a lot of people that Keith Moon would be the person in the 60s that most people would point to as like the godhead of punk rock drumming. Stephen McDonald makes a really compelling argument that was actually Ringo.
Oh, I agree. I mean, guys like Clem Burke loves Keith Moon. I would say Rat Scabies probably loves Keith Moon. But at the same time, I Clem loved Jerry Nolan. He loved the Beatles and the Stones. So, and it's about playing to the song and staying as concise as the song, and staying out of the way of whoever is, whatever that lick is or whatever the lead vocalist is doing, and just lending support. So, and the king of that is Ringo.
Yeah,
me.
True enough. And Curt just said something too. When I would always get, who's your favorite drummer, yada, yada, I would always be like, I'm not really sure, because when I go see a band, I'm not focusing, to tell you the truth, on the drums. I'm focusing on the band and the song. The drummer is just one part of that band, most important, you know. But I have friends who are so Ringo, John Bonham, Keith Moon, yada yada yada, and to me, they're all just incredible. You know, they're all just incredible. You know.
Yeah, right for the band that they're in. I mean, I think that's another hallmark of punk rock is that you could be a drummer that had your own stylistic way of expressing yourself and your own way of playing. And if you found the right people to lock in with, then you could develop that, and that became the way that you played drums. But it's sort of that self-taught nature that I think a lot of punk rock offers.
Oh, and Keith Moon had that, you know, I mean, their music at times was like right on the edge of anarchy. and I used to, I'm going to be a name dropper. I did a lot of stuff with Richard Goddard for a while in the early mid 80s. And I remember we were talking about Keith Moon, and he said there was rhythm amongst the flurry, he said.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was it. There was this flurry, but if you like didn't look at him, there was really, he was compelling, you know, pushing a rhythm forward, and it just worked so well with that.
And that's why I think, not to get off topic, why I think personally he was tortured too. You know, how he felt as a person. I'm not trying to be an armchair psych, but how he was as a person is how he expressed himself on drums. Chaos, complete chaos, but with rhythm and steady, you know, at the same time, you know. And you think of Charlie Watts, right? He's such a gentleman, right? He was, God rest his soul, you know, but he played like that too, you know. Yeah. You know, just nice and tasty. I'm Charlie Watts, you know.
I love in interviews his vicious defense of like, I'm going to speed up and slow down as it suits the songs. Like, I'm going to play to the song in such an extreme way when we talk about playing to the song that I'm going to break whatever rules people think they have or metronomic. And I'm
never played with a click, I bet.
Yeah, no.
Honky Tonk Woman. It's like it starts at one speed and it hits that first chorus, and it's a little bit faster.
Speeds up a little bit.
And you know, and Charlie, my understanding from what I read is he said if this is the take or not. It was up to Charlie.
Interesting. Cool.
And he, you know, Charlie could tell, but it worked. You sure?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Allie is not popping up, so I'm imagining that you don't have any questions.
There she is.
There's Allie.
Here's one. So we have a question right here. This is, any thoughts about Bill Stevenson?
So many thoughts about Bill Stevenson. He is absolutely fantastic and probably one of my all-time favorite drummers and punk drummers and songwriters. Man, do I love the Descendants.
Yeah, he's one of the guys who I remember I saw him play for the first time. We played a show with them in some roller skating ring, and we were headlining over them, for frick's sake. And I had never seen them play. I remember just sitting there going, I have to go on after him. Are you kidding? No. I was so intimidated because he's such a special he's a musician and a drummer.
We were really lucky in Forbidden Beat to have Jim Ruland write an essay about Bill Stevenson. And if you don't know, Jim Ruland co-wrote the Keith Morris book. He also wrote the co-wrote the Bad Religion book, which obviously you're in. Right. I think Jim actually connected you and I. Awesome. But Jim also has a book out next week. And I know this is supposed to be about my book, but we're going to talk about Jim's book because Jim is good people and he's an amazing writer. He has a book called Corporate Rock Sucks, The Rise and Fall of SST Records that I got a sneak peek at. And if you love the SST era, you're going to lose your mind. It's a really great book.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I wanted to do one shout out in this book.
Yeah.
Besides Ira Elliott's, his essay on proto-punk or pre-punk, which I think is great. The big surprise to me was Matt Deal, the piece he wrote on the D beat.
Yeah.
Like I never knew this thing existed. And from reading it, I said, oh, the Buzzcocks, everybody's happy nowadays. And it's just like credit to him that he could transmit the idea of what something sounds like through words. I just
very cool.
Shout out to Matt.
Matt is a fantastic writer and a deep, deep, deep music fan and a deep punk music fan. But I always kind of had a hard time describing the difference between a Forbidden Beat and a D beat, right?
Right.
You kind of just
Me too. I had no idea.
But what Matt did in that essay, the time he took, the details that he focused on, I felt like I finally had my arms around something that I had been struggling with for decades.
I know,
Yeah.
you know, from what he was writing, I said, oh, that's it. I get it. I got it. Yeah, I understand it now.
Yeah, You Tear Me Up by the Buzzcocks, or Realities of War by Discharge. And Discharge is the punk band, the
Discharge.
UK 82 second wave.
Mhm.
Why?
Yes, right. Yeah.
We love that band. Oh my God, we love Discharge.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm glad you read that and liked it, and I will pass that on to Matt. He's good people.
Thank you. Please do.
Allie, I think we are getting towards the end here. I'm just going to let Curt and Pete just really quick. Is there anything else? What's next for you guys? What do you guys got going on?
Not much. I have to go feed my kids, and then I met three boys who were like, "Where's our dinner, Dad?" And then I'm gonna probably go play a little drums because I'm inspired from this great talk. And again, I'm not trying to blow smoke up your. You know what, Steve? Please, is there anybody out there who have not purchased yet? This book is remarkable. Trust me, you'll love it.
Thank you so
I
much.
also, you know, there was a question here in the Q&A from Carmag, an old friend of mine, who said something about, you know, why don't you talk about Jim Sclavunos? And I don't know if you know, Jim now has been playing with Nick Cave for like 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
He really started in the no wave scene, and it was always incredible. I used to love seeing him play with Lydia Lunch and Eight-Eyed Spy, because
Wow.
he again had this drum set of all mixed up pieces, and he was like 6'7", so his arms would just fly out of anywhere to play things in the oddest places. And it's like all credit to him. Like only in punk rock could you do something as audacious as that. And God bless him, he stuck to his guns, and now he's like been playing with Nick Cave, who plays arenas. You know, so
Pretty good gig,
good
huh?
for him. Well,
I
yeah.
love Nick Cave. Nick Cave is fantastic. Curt, what is next for you?
Well, actually, it's not a punk or music book. I've been working on a book about a character based off my dad, who spent a little time in jail and business went belly up in his 60s. And I realized, you know, the Jerry book is about a guy whose dreams just could never come true.
Right.
And when I think about my dad, it's like a guy whose dreams could never come true. So it's like, I got to get that one out of my system. And then I'll think of like, do I want to write another music book or not? But so, yeah, that's the one. I had, when my mom was dying, I spent a lot of time with my dad, and I was blogging about it. And I just, you know, found him to be an idiosyncratic, strange guy struggling with getting older. And so, you know, that is the book. Like, you know, what is it like to struggle to get older when you can't face the fact maybe that you're not going to be a star, or whatever star means to you.
Well,
You're here.
I would read that book in a
Me
heartbeat.
too.
All I got to do is finish it.
Yeah.
If you need beta readers, you got two of us right
All
here.
right.
Hey,
Thank you.
Steve. Hey, Steve. What's next for you, my man?
Yeah.
I'm on the never-ending Forbidden Beat book tour, so I'm just trying
Great.
all the good work you guys put into this book. I want to make sure as many people as possible find out about it. Toying with the idea of a second volume. I'm not making any promises, but the response has been good enough, and enough people have approached me and said, you know, if you do a second book. So I'm toying with that,
Awesome.
and then I'm always writing fiction, crime fiction in the background.
Beautiful.
Thanks, man. Allie,
Well,
take it
Very
away.
cool. All righty. Well, guys, this has been wonderful. I've had so much fun. I think that the audience has had so much fun. Some great questions, great comments. Thank you, everyone. So I think it's about time we call it a night. Thank you all so
right.
much for joining us. For anyone
Sure.
who wants to get hands-on copies of Forbidden Beat, I'm going to go ahead and relink this in chat. So it's just one click away. Go ahead and follow that over to our website.
Do us
Of
a
course,
favor. Do us a favor. If you're going to buy a copy of this book, please, please, please buy it through Third Place Books, because bookstores that are independent bookstores that do events like this and support authors like me and contributors like Pete and Curt are incredibly important. So if you're going to buy the book because Pete told you to, please buy it through Third Place Books.
you're here.
yeah, what he said. So let us know, everyone, of course, what you thought of this event, either in person if you're local or on social media. We always, always, always love to hear from you. Steve, Curt, and Pete, huge thank
All right,
you
guys.
for being here. It's been so
Thank
fun.
you.
All right, Curt, Steve. Goodbye, Allie.
See you later.
Goodbye.
Thank you
All
very
right,
much.
guys. Bye.
Good
Bye-bye. Cheers.
night.
Whoop, whoop. Adios.